Once again, it's a privilege to be welcomed into your homes. Today, we are reading from Matthew chapter 18, verse 21 to chapter 19, verse 1. Peter approached Jesus and asked him, "Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive him? As many as 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. That is why the kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who decided to settle account with his servants. When he began the accounting, a debtor was brought to him who owed him a huge amount. Since he had no way of paying it back, his master ordered him to be sold, along with his wife, his children, and all his property, in payment of that debt. At that, the servant fell down, did him homage, and said, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back in full.' Moved with compassion, the master of that servant let him go and forgave him the loan. When that servant had left, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him a much smaller amount. He seized him and started to choke him, demanding, 'Pay back what you owe.' Falling to his knees, his fellow servant begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I'll pay you back.' But he refused. Instead, he had a fellow servant put in prison until he paid back the debt. Now, when his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were deeply disturbed and went to their master and reported the whole affair. His master summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked servant, I forgave you your entire debt because you begged me to. Should you not have had pity on your fellow servant, as I had pity on you?' Then in anger, his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the whole debt. So will my heavenly Father do to you, unless each of you forgives his brother from his heart." When Jesus finished these words, he left Galilee and went to the district of Judea across the Jordan. Learning to forgive those who have hurt us is probably one of the greatest challenges in life. Peter's question to Jesus at the beginning of the gospel reading comes out of that sense of how difficult it is to forgive someone. How often must I forgive my brother? The implication of his question is that there has to be a limit to forgiveness. Peter decides to err on the general side, suggesting 7 times would be often enough. In the biblical culture of the time, 7 was considered to be the complete number. To forgive 7 times is complete forgiveness, surely. No more could be asked of someone. Yet, Jesus does ask more, not 7 times, but 77 times. There is to be no limit to our willingness to forgive. Jesus underpins this very challenging call with a parable that he tells. In that parable, the servant owes his master 10,000 talents. This was a massive sum of money. It simply could never be paid back. In the parable, the master felt so sorry for his servant that he simply cancelled the debt completely. Here we have the triumph of grace over justice. There is an image here of the gracious and generous way that God deals with us. Jesus reveals a God whose mercy triumphs over justice. The most memorable image of such a God is the father in the story of the prodigal son. The remainder of the parable tells us that we must allow the mercy that God freely pours into our lives to flow through us to touch others. This is what the servant who was forgiven failed to do. Dear friends, one of the sayings of Jesus expresses the message of the parable very clearly. Be merciful as your Father is merciful. Shalom. Peace.